the question is, like, do you really want to make the life of someone you love easier?
Whew, that's a doozy of a question to try to answer. All right, guys. So as you know, we talk a lot about several topics here on the show. One of them, though, that we've been discussing more recently is parenting. As you know, I am a young parent myself. I have a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old. And so I'm always looking for advice and experts' feedback on parenting, how to be a better parent. And we came across this clip recently, so figured why not go ahead and play a little bit of it and get some thoughts out there, see what you guys think, and you hear a little bit about what I think as well. So here we go.
Most children now have older parents, right? Because people aren't having children until they're in their 30s.
Skip that one. I definitely didn't make that one happen. Married at 21, first kid at 26, and I'm 29 now. So already off the bat, we're on completely different pages. Some of you know, this is Jordan Peterson. This is Patrick David. Had Patrick on the show. I have not had Jordan on the show yet, but Jordan is a clinical psychologist, talks a lot about psychological formation of children and things like that from a clinical perspective. And so always curious to hear what he has to say about it. And then Patrick is one of my favorite kind of question askers, interviewers that's out there. So that's why I wanted to pull this clip.
Having a parent who's in his or her 30s and having a parent who's in his or her 20s.
Yep.
The 20-year-olds are still kind of like kids, and they're going to be more usefully neglectful, I would say.
Facts.
Well, look, one of the things we used to do with my daughter when she was very little was, she was about 1.5 years, is we'd have her in a room alone, and she would usually complain about that for a few minutes, and then she'd find a way to amuse herself.
That means she would scream a lot and a lot. Been there.
Herself, she liked to take books out of shelves and put them back in, and like if you let her get through that initial bit of misery, then she would learn how to regulate herself, and she got very good at that. And so that's a good example of minor privation having a positive influence. But I want
to stop it right there, because that's something that I struggle with a lot, because my wife and I do the same thing at certain times where it's like if it's bedtime or if it's quiet time or if it's like something like that, the kids do not like it, and there's a lot of screaming and stuff, especially when they're babies. But eventually, if you leave them there for a few minutes, that ends up stopping unless something's wrong, right? And obviously, if they keep crying, you want to go figure out what's wrong. But to a certain point, there has to be something that they can learn about how to start entertaining themselves, and like you said, self-regulate. I think you can tell sometimes when an adult was tended to far too often as a kid, because they still kind of lack these certain abilities coming into adulthood. The lack of ability to regulate themselves and their emotions, because their emotions were always immediately tended to as a kid, and so that's kind of what they got used to. I think this is a really good point to bring up, and he kind of glazes over it because that's not the broader point that he's making here.
Children used to have multiple siblings, and siblings toughen you up because there's tremendous competition in families among siblings, and they had younger parents who had fewer resources. And now parents are older, first of all, and second, they're more resource rich, and so they're more likely to schedule their children to death in some sense to provide them with all the opportunities that they feel would be useful. And that's understandable. And plus, because they have fewer children, each child is in some sense more precious. Not like if you have 10 children, you don't love all of them, but there's 10 of them. There's only so much excess attention that can go around, and they do a lot of socializing each other rather than being socialized by parents. But if you only have one child, you're going to devote all your resources to providing them with absolutely everything you can provide them with. And one of the dangers of that is that you'll overprotect them and you'll provide them with too much. And we don't understand those dynamics, right? We don't understand how much you should stay hands off your kids and let them go out there and make their own mistakes and find their own way. And that.
Man, that's such a difficult one for me. It's like a constant struggle, and especially between my wife and me. And for the most part, we agree on a lot of things. But that's one thing that's tough to figure out is you want to provide a better life for your kids than the one that you had. I think that's the goal of generational growth. Like every generation should be getting better. We should be constantly growing as a society as well as growing as individuals. And if we're constantly doing that, then my dad probably had a better childhood than his dad, and then I might have a better childhood than my dad did, and then my son will have a better childhood than I did, and hopefully his son will, and just like consistently kind of growing and learning. But at the same time, that's what ends up with spoiled kids who don't know how to go make anything of themselves in the world because they grew up getting everything all the time, never wanted for anything, never had to struggle. It's like that illustration of the caterpillar in the cocoon, and the little girl captured the caterpillar, sees it go in the cocoon, and then she was watching it struggling to get out of the cocoon, and then so she goes in and helps it get out of the cocoon and essentially breaks the cocoon for the caterpillar turning into a butterfly, and then basically the butterfly was stuck in the jar and lived its whole life in the jar because it never gained the strength that it took to break out of the cocoon, which helps strengthen the butterfly's wings and helps it actually fly away. And so that's a really tough dynamic because you don't like to see your kids struggle. You don't like to see your kids get frustrated or figure something out. It's so much easier just to bend over and help them do the thing, or like do the thing for them, instead of letting them struggle, figure it out, whine, cry, get frustrated with themselves. That's one of those really difficult balances. If you have the answer to that one, let me know.
And so I think one of the consequences of that is that we do have a reasonable percentage of young people, maybe young adolescents, the kind that you hear about at university, who have been overprotected and overscheduled and under-challenged in some sense. And so they're not very resilient. And then, of course, what's happening in the universities, the safe spaces and the trigger warnings and all of that. Yeah. And there's good recent research on this. Trigger warnings clearly make things worse rather than better. We extend that overprotection far longer than is helpful. It's hard though, because as I said, when you have resources, you can use them to make your children's lives, let's say,
real quick on
easier.
that last thing too. My wife and I right now are watching through We Crashed, which is a series about WeWork, the kind of the rise and fall of Adam Newman and the whole company of WeWork and everything that happened with that. And there's this one scene where his wife, Anne Hathaway in the series, is having to explain something that she said to this group of employees. One of the girls stands up in the audience and says, what you're saying is that it's our fault that we got offended at what you said and it wasn't what you said. And she said, yes. And they all get this big uproar. And I was just like, I fully agree, even though in the show, I think that they were kind of portraying it as like, that's bad. I fully agree with that mentality because you're never going to be able to control what other people say. And that's the problem with this whole discussion, this whole conversation, is that and where cancel culture comes from and everything that comes along with that. It's the idea that because you can't regulate your own emotions, you can't control your own reactions, you can't control your own feelings about something, you have to try to control what other people are saying. And that is a endless losing battle that will drive you crazy and turn you into a lunatic because it's an impossible problem to solve. You're never going to be able to control what everybody else says, especially in a country where free speech is like the cornerstone of freedoms. So you have to learn how to regulate your emotions. You have to learn how to control what you can control and let go of what you can't control. And what other people say is something that you can't control, but how you react to what they say is something that you can control. It's just a basic adult habit formation of discipline to understand that you can't control what everybody else does, you can't control what everybody else says, but you can control how you react to it, and you can control what you do and what you say.
The question is, do you really want to make the life of someone you love easier? And that's an incredibly difficult question.
Do you really want to make the life of someone you love easier? Whew, that's a doozy of a question to try to answer. And I don't know the answer to that question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. If you liked this clip, if you liked this commentary, leave a comment below. Let us know what you're thinking. Leave a rating review, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're watching, wherever you listen to this. Love to hear from you on this topic because it's a really important one. So thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you guys next time.